Welcome back to the Gray and Gritty podcast. My name is LJ Winnefeld.
And I am Sandy Winnefeld, the Gritty's dad, otherwise known as the Gray.
And Dad, we had a very exciting Saturday night last night.
Yeah, we actually were very fortunate to be able to attend the Army-Navy game, the 126th playing of that storied rivalry. And it turned out to be a pretty good outcome for Navy. I'm wearing Navy's vest tonight, even though I'm a Georgia Tech graduate, in your honor, and it was a heck of a game. Army played a great game. They really did. They were tough, gritty. But in the end, Navy came out on top. What'd you think?
Yeah, I think that this game was indicative of what Navy football has been all year. They've been in tough, scrappy fights most of the year. Almost every single game has come down to the last play or the last drive. And this Army-Navy game was no different. I think that was probably the gutsiest decision I've ever seen a Navy football coach make by going for it on 4th and goal from the 8-yard line. But frankly, I mean, Navy had been able to move the ball somewhat at will, and the defense had been so staunch that I thought that he was going to kick the field goal and then say, okay, hey, we know we can stop them here, and then drive down the field and either get a field goal to tie it, because it was a 6-point lead, or maybe get a touchdown to end it with another chance. But to just go for it like that and put the whole game, the whole season on the line right there was such a gutsy play. And talk about two incredibly clutch kids who were calm under pressure. I mean, I think it's very easy to think about these guys that are playing, not just the Navy football team, but all across college sports. And these are young men on the field making these decisions under pressure, executing and performing when there are millions, probably close to 10 million people watching you play. And you definitely know they were watching that play because it was so close for the entire game. So I still can't believe that they were able to complete that 4th and 8. It feels a lot better being on this side of an Army-Navy game than on the other because we've been familiar with both. But I was happy to be there and happy to be there with you.
Yeah, it was great, and it really was a widely watched moment. I got a note this morning from my good friend Andrew Luck, who said, hey, go Navy, loved the 4th down. Pretty amazing. So earlier in the week, you put out a Substack post written that was a very interesting data analytical view of who was going to win this game. And you covered a whole lot of different variables in there, rushing yards gained or defended against and that sort of thing. And you came out with a 61% likelihood that Navy was going to win this game. So how were you feeling at halftime about that?
Well, I turned and I asked you, when Navy completed that pass and went up by a point, I said, who would you rather be right now? Would you rather be Army or would you rather be Navy? Because even in that moment, yeah, you've got the lead with 4 minutes left to go or something like that. But Army, the entire first half, was able to drive down the field, and all they needed was a field goal. And they seemed to have a pretty good field goal kicker on the other side of the field. So, frankly, if you had told me in that moment, who would you rather be, I probably would have said Army, because they had the ability to drive the ball downfield, chew up some clock, kick a field goal to end it. And the reason for that is I've lost on a game-missed field goal. I've lost on a game-winning field goal in the past in this rivalry. So I was starting to get some flashbacks for that. The model said 61%, and I can jump in to some basics of how the model was built out because I think that's interesting. But the model said 61%. But in the article, I said over and over again, because the Army-Navy game, no matter what the statistics are, no matter how good a team is, no matter what the spread is, it always comes down to a couple of really big plays. And it's always very close. There have been blowouts in previous seasons, but especially lately, the games have always been close. And typically, the favored team has lost. And that's happened a couple of times to Army in the last 5 years, and it's happened a couple of times to us as well. 61% is a great number to hear, and it was 0.1% off of what ESPN's predictor was, which I didn't realize until I actually checked the start time of the game later that day. Even though it was 61%, I actually was still feeling more like a 50-50 coin toss, even though I built this model and the data said that they had a good chance to win.
So that Georgia Tech analytics degree is paying off, huh? I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I mentioned in the article, I would not have bet my life savings on this model. I'm still a novice when it comes to this data analytics stuff. But it was very interesting. And the model that I used, is what's called a Bayesian logistics regression model, which sounds
complicated
really
to me.
scary. Yeah, it sounds scary, right? But
hardly
really
spell
what
that.
it is, on the basic level, you have a binary outcome, like a 1 or a 0. Are you going to win or are you going to lose? Are you going to make the playoffs or are you not going to make the playoffs? And you take all of this data that you think may be a predictor of that outcome. The number of yards that we've rushed, the number of pass yards we have, the number of penalties we've taken, the number of turnovers. And you essentially consider those as predictors. And so if you gather up all of this data, you build out a simple regression model, not a Bayesian, but a simple regression model. Just kind of looks like y equals mx plus b from algebra, where y is the outcome, m, the slope, is it's a coefficient about how important the x value is, which is your predictor, and then b being your intercept, which typically for this kind of situation should be 0. So let's say you have 100 passing yards per game, and that may have led to a victory. Well, if you look at all of the data, and it turns out that the passing yards metric matters a lot for whether or not you win, that m, that coefficient, is going to increase in its importance, so it's going to go up. Now you can also have a negative correlation. So if the number of penalty yards you give up, could have a negative correlation to your ability to win. So that's a very broad brushstrokes. That's kind of like what regression is, and I think that a lot of people, they see regression, but to me, on the most basic level, and I'm talking basic, it's like the algebra that you learned when you were in early high school or middle school. And so you use Bayesian, you add in some biases that you may have, some assumptions about how important, let's say, passing yards is, into this y equals mx plus b formula. So you basically inform that model before you run it, and then it updates that assumption as it looks at all of the data and all of the results. So if I think that passing yards will have a really big positive effect on whether or not Navy will win, then I tell the model that before I run it. And then if it looks at all the data and it says, it doesn't really have as big of an effect as my programmer is telling me it does, but it does have a positive effect. What it will do is it'll pull passing yards down. It'll pull that coefficient down, so that ultimately, when you combine it with all of the other predictors, rush yards, penalties, turnovers, you get a more accurate prediction of what's going to happen. So a little bit complex. Hopefully I didn't lose some of the listeners along the way, but it was really a lot of fun, and it was great that the model was correct.
Yeah, and what you're describing sounds an awful lot like machine learning, where there's a coefficient applied to, let's say, this picture is a cat, and all the little pixels in that picture, if you ever have anything like that, it's an important element of contributing to maybe predicting that a picture is actually a cat. But, probably enough about football for our listeners today. Not much going on in the national security world that's like really sticking out. Obviously, all the normal things are eating away. Ukraine and Russia, still long-term negotiations, but between the U.S., Ukraine, Russia, EU, that sort of thing. But it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. We'll wait and see if somebody can pull a rabbit out of the hat. But what else we got, LJ?
Yeah, so today, Dad, I wanted to talk to you about the NDAA that just passed through the House.
Which is?
The National Defense Authorization Act. To set the stage for our listeners, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 26, and you may be thinking to yourself, aren't we already in fiscal year 26? Didn't that start in October? And you are correct. But the FY26 NDAA is the defense bill Congress passes every year that tells the Pentagon what it is allowed to do, what it has to prioritize, and what it has to report back on. This week, the House passed a compromise version by a vote of 312 to 112, authorizing about $901 billion in defense policy and programs. Now, you might see some different numbers across different headlines, but 901 is what we're going to use here. So I think it's important to remember that this is an authorization, not the actual appropriations check, and I want you to talk about that here in a sec, Dad. But I think I'm going to pull out a couple highlights here before I kick it over to you. The bill packs in a 4% raise for troops, extends $400 million per year in Ukraine security aid, promises big acquisition reform, which we've talked a little bit about on this podcast, and even uses oversight leverage to force transparency on the controversial U.S. strikes down in Venezuela. We're not going to touch that. I am interested to hear your thoughts about the NDAA. And can you kind of explain, maybe go a little deeper than I did, what is the difference between an authorization and an appropriations bill, and what that is kind of like, and then what are your thoughts about this NDAA?
Yeah, so you're absolutely correct. The authorization bill is really written by the authorizing committee in each chamber, such as Armed Services in this case. And those committees focus mostly on like policy design, program structure, oversight of whether programs are working the way they're supposed to work, and what kind of reports are due, and that kind of thing. And what they really want the department to prioritize and spend its money on. But that isn't enough. The appropriations bills are under the control of the House and Senate Appropriations Committees, and there are 12 subcommittees, and they each cover a broad area, and they're the ones that examine funding requests annually, and then they decide the specific dollar amounts for agencies and programs within overall budget limits. And you can't spend $1. Even though you have a beautiful authorization bill, you can't spend $1 until you get that appropriations bill. And the committees jealously protect their prerogatives. And theoretically, you're not supposed to be able to write an appropriations bill until you have the authorization bill in hand. But imagine this, in Washington, D.C., jealousy among politicians, and they certainly are very closely protective of their committee prerogatives. And so we will stand by waiting. I find it interesting that if you're the chief financial officer of a corporation and your budget is due on a certain date and you don't deliver it by that date, you are on the hot seat in a major way and you may lose your job. Well, what is it, December? And we were supposed to have our appropriations bills done 2.5 months ago? Well, we've seen this movie every single year for the last few decades, and it's getting tiring. And there's real impact on the department when you're operating under what's called a continuing resolution, which only allows you to spend the same money in the same places that you did under the last appropriations bills. So you can have no new start programs. And that's very difficult in a very dynamic world where security environment is changing rapidly, and we need more agility, not less agility. So I really wish we could have a responsible Congress that would get these things done. But it doesn't look like that's going to change in the near future.
Well, and we talked about the importance of having a functioning government, but also a government that delivers its budgets on time. When the government shut down in October, and talking about this may be the worst time in the history of the world to have a government that it was shut down due to the rapidly changing national security and geopolitical environment that we're currently living through. On the same scale of what we saw in the 1930s with a lot of revisionist powers trying to overcome the rules-based system. One question I did have for you, because I know that you were intimately involved with this as the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. What have you seen a lot of when you have an authorization passed and then it goes to appropriations? Are there a lot of changes that are usually made with from an NDAA to the actual budget for the military, or is it pretty much a one-for-one and they're just rubber stamping it?
Generally, and I could be wrong here, but generally the appropriations committees can't appropriate more money than has been authorized by the authorizing committees, but they can appropriate less. And they scrutinize very, very carefully. They each have their own staffs. Their own staffs have their own individual levels of expertise, their own interests. There are interests on the members that are on those committees. So you may have an appropriator who would actually rather spend more money on a particular program, and sometimes they've gotten away with that. So there's that wrinkle in there that the appropriators, they really have an awful lot of power, because you can't spend a dime without an appropriations bill.
Yeah, the power of the purse is really the biggest thing. And to I guess clarify that answer, or maybe even my own question, if I have $901 billion that I can appropriate for, that was authorized via the NDAA, I know that that's kind of broken out into line items. As an appropriations committee, I've got 901, I don't care what the NDAA says, I won't go over 901, but I want to spend way more money on F-35s, or I want to spend way more money on recruiting. Can I change stuff within it, or
Yeah. The
is that like,
appropriators,
hey, I can only go up to a certain amount per line item?
unless I don't remember correctly, the appropriators can pretty much do whatever they want to do in there, and they won't hesitate to do it. Now, that doesn't make the authorizers happy, but it's not like the authorizers hand over a line item bill to the appropriators and they have to rubber stamp it or not. There's a lot of changes that happen in there. And one of the things that we're going to have to watch now is that the Trump administration is testing the notion that that's actually embedded in law, that they're required to spend what Congress appropriates. They believe that they should be allowed to spend less than what Congress appropriates. In other words, if Congress could give you an authorization and appropriations bill for a particular class of ship, and if the administration doesn't want to build that particular class of ship, they believe they have the constitutional authority to not do that. And this is going to be a case the Supreme Court, and it's not a ship that they're talking about. There are other things that are being tested.
This kind of goes back to Doge a little bit, right? And what you're talking about there, yeah.
Yeah, but the Trump administration believes the executive branch has the authority. That they're being told, here's some money you can spend, but they don't feel like they have to spend it all. And it's going to be an interesting question before the Supreme Court.
And that kind of seems, I mean, it's a check on power to a certain extent, because if Congress appropriates money and tells the executive branch that they have to spend it, but if the executive branch doesn't feel like that's the appropriate way to do it, it's a really complex and interesting constitutional, question.
And for those members of Congress who have not been showing a whole lot of backbone lately, this is one thing that will really get their ire, because a lot of the stuff that's in those bills are things they put in there because money is being spent in their district. And now you have an administration which could, for political purposes, it could say, I don't like this program because it's in a blue state, so we're just not going to spend the money on it. That really gets things tangled up pretty badly. But Congress has ways of fighting back. We'll see. It's going to be fascinating over the next few months to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think if you're a nerd about this stuff, kind of like you and I are, I guess it's fascinating. I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out, because, I mean, this is kind of the future of where our country is going to go in terms of how it'll operate. So, It's interesting stuff.
Okay. So we have one last topic today, which was an interesting tie. We put a post out on our Leadership Anchors series recently. The fifth anchor is leading change. And the very first thread in leading change is challenge the assumptions. We had the opportunity, the privilege yesterday to spend a little bit of time before the Army-Navy game with a woman named Robin Johnson. And Robin actually was a major in the Army, retired, and then decided to become a comedian. And now she's still a pretty funny person, but she's working for a major defense contractor on their veterans programs. Really interesting person to talk to. It dawned on us that the comedian's perspective on humor and on a particular topic that they're being humorous about really meshes well with that challenge the assumptions mentality. So I'm going to tell you a joke, and I won't do it the justice that she did. But, I travel a lot. I stay in a lot of hotels, and I like to try to stay in physical shape, so I go to the gyms in these hotels. And, the real pain about doing that is every time I go in there, there's someone in there working out really hard who is a Marine, an ex-Marine or a Marine or something like that, and they are, bulging biceps, super strong, very, very fit, and they're sweating all over the machines. Kind of, irritates me a little bit. And, so I'll usually walk up and say, excuse me, ma'am. And when you think about that, I mean, we got a big laugh out of that, right?
Yeah.
And when you think about it, what the comedian's technique is she is trying to get us to create a picture in our minds of a stereotype that we would build as she's talking about this, buff Marine working out in a gym who's probably a guy in a Marine tank top, that kind of thing. And she flips the script on us at the end, and it's a woman. And that's the
because
way
a lot
people,
of female Marines are typically very strong people.
Pretty damn good shape, absolutely.
In order to continue.
Emily Peterson being one of them, one of your company mates from the Naval Academy. And it really is a good window into challenging the assumptions, trying to break down the assumptions that you have that are building in your mind that inhibit you from being creative. And I thought it was terrific. There's another joke that I've heard in the past of special operations guys. He's like, well, how do you get an elephant in a refrigerator? And most people will go, you can't put an elephant in a refrigerator. It's too big. How would you do that? And the answer is you open the door and you put the elephant in the refrigerator and you close the door. And then they go, well, how do you get a rhinoceros in the refrigerator? And people go, I guess you open the door, you put the rhinoceros in, and you close the door. And you go, no, you open the door, you got to pull the elephant out. And then you put the rhinoceros in and close the door. So just kind of challenging yourself to really think differently of a problem. And the comic perspective is kind of a great mindset there. So any thoughts from you on that?
I think that if you're going to be a good comedian, you have to have a mix of creativity with a knack for being unexpected. Because, like you're saying, you set this scene, you lay this out. And those are some of the best jokes, is where they set the scene, and then something completely, unexpected comes up. But I think it also takes a lot of creativity. And I told Robin yesterday when we were at this tailgate, I think comedians are some of the best critical thinkers on the planet, because they have to challenge their own assumptions and biases. But not only that, they have to recognize what other people's biases are, or what the general bias is in a certain situation. So to be able to recognize that, and then to be able to, circumvent that bias in a creative and funny way, I think takes a lot of active engagement in thinking. Because I think there's a lot of people on the planet, and to no fault of them, I mean, we all do it, that go through life on their base operating system, if you will, where they're not critically thinking, they're not challenging their own assumptions, they're not thinking differently about problems all the time. And that's a lot easier to do. It takes less mental bandwidth, less mental power, less energy. It allows you to just kind of relax. Comedians, I feel like, are very good, because it's literally their livelihood is to do the opposite of that.
And something that we learned from her, which I didn't realize, when I think of a comedian, it's like, I think I'll try my hand at going up and doing stand-up. And, and we think, these people are just naturally funny. And I think in many cases they probably are naturally funny. But she actually had to study. There's like a 3-year program she went through. And if you look up, again, it's Robin Phoenix Johnson. She actually is a certified humor professional, because she had to go through 3 years of training to become a comic. And she really is funny. And what's really great about Robin is she applies her humor to veterans. And you may have somebody who's severely injured, or something like that. And she finds a way to sort of change their attitude, make them feel better about themselves and about life, just by making them laugh. And I think that's precious. So I really think the world of what she does. And now she's obviously working at Boeing on their veterans programs. But look her up.
Yeah, continuing to do good work at Boeing too, because it's great to see companies that have active veterans programs, not just for veterans, but also for military spouses and veterans' spouses as well. I think that's equally as important. So.
Yep. So Christmas approaches. We wish that our listeners have a fantastic holiday season, no matter what your faith is and what kind of things you like to do over Christmas. We hope, or over the Christmas holiday season. We certainly hope you're safe and that you have a chance to spend time with family in a great time of year. But LJ also put out a terrific post today on our Substack about how you look at happiness. And why don't you tell us about, just a little minute blurb on that, LJ?
Yeah, so at the Naval Academy, midshipmen have something called the happiness factor, which is you take the number of days that you're going to be on vacation or leave, and you divide it by the number of days remaining until you get to leave. So if you're going to be taking 7 days of vacation and you're 10 days away, right, then your happiness factor is 0.7. So essentially it's a way to calculate the morale of yourself and the brigade. And it's not the only thing that we keep track of at the Naval Academy. Midshipmen, specifically plebes, are required to keep track of the number of days until things like Thanksgiving, the Army-Navy game, second-class ring dance, graduation, stuff like that, right? And it's a really good way to enforce discipline, rote memorization, being able to come up with something that you have to have memorized quickly, which is very important for things like immediate battle drills in the Marine Corps or emergency procedures in the cockpit that are going to happen later on in your career. And so this is one of the many things that they have to memorize and be able to spit back out pretty quickly. But what I think it does, and kind of looking back on it in hindsight, is I think it's the perfect embodiment of how we all kind of tend to live our lives, counting the days until something we want to happen. Right? We do this with Christmas, however many days until Christmas, however many days until the new year. We look forward to the end of the year for bonuses. We look forward to the weekend. We look, all of this stuff that we do to ourselves, constantly looking forward. And so what I did in this post, and it's a Stoic Sunday thing. If you don't read it, I highly encourage you to check out our Stoic Sunday thread of Gray and Gritty. But I challenge the readers, and I challenge all of you all, this holiday season, and frankly in every season, to relish the moment that you're living in right now. Appreciating the moment is almost as much as enjoying the special moments when they come.
So keep your happiness factor above 1 every day of the year. And I will say that our happiness factor last night was quite high. And so, again, congratulations to Navy. As I would like to relate frequently, when I was in uniform, when I would get interviewed during the Army-Navy game, people would always want me to tell them who I thought was going to win, and my answer was always the same. The American people win. 8,000 of our most amazing young men and women in that stadium, all who are willing to put their lives on the line for the people who are watching the game, is pretty special. I hope everybody gets a chance to go someday.
Yeah. Hey, thank you for listening this week to Gray and Gritty. Again, this is a podcast on leadership, geopolitics, and national security, but we obviously talk about other stuff as well, because frankly, at the end of the day, this is just a conversation between my dad and I, and we're happy to have you along for it. So I hope everybody has a good week. If we don't see you then, have a great holiday season.